Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, Jamaica Roots TV. Please remember to like, share and subscribe, and please leave a comment as well. December 22nd will mark the 240th anniversary of the Zong Massacre. So the Zong Massacre is a very dark part of our history, and it just shows us the type of atrocities that our ancestors went through, and they basically paved the way for us to be here today. So we're gonna pause for a moment on December 22nd to remember those who died on the Zong. So let's get right into it. The Zong Massacre was a mass killing of more than 130 enslaved Africans by the crew of the British slave ship the Zong on and in the days following November 29, 1781. The William Gregson Slave Trading Syndicate, based in Liverpool, owned the ship and sailed her in the Atlantic slave trade. As was common business practice, they had taken out insurance on the lives of the enslaved people as cargo. According to the crew, when the ship ran low on drinking water, following navigational mistakes, the crew threw enslaved people overboard. After the ship reached the port at Black River, Jamaica, the Zong's owners made a claim to their insurers for the loss of the enslaved people. When the insurers refused to pay, the resulting court case Gregson versus Gilbert held that in some circumstances, the murder of the enslaved people was legal and that the insurers could be required to pay for those who had died. The jury found for the slavers, but at a subsequent appeal hearing, the judges, led by Lord Chief Justice, the Earl of Mansfield, ruled against the slave trading syndicate owners due to new evidence that suggested the captain and crew were at fault. Following the first trial, Alaudo Equiano, a freedman, brought news of the massacre to the attention of the anti-slavery campaigner, Granville Sharp, who worked unsuccessfully to have the ship's crew prosecuted for murder. Because of the legal dispute, reports of the massacre received increased publicity, stimulating the abolitionist movement in the late 18th and 19th centuries. The Zong events were increasingly cited as a powerful symbol of the horrors of the Middle Passage, the transoceanic route by which enslaved people were brought to the New World. So the Zong trial ignited the abolitionist movement. So it was there before, but it picked up some speed right after this occurred. So we're going to learn more about the Zong and the crew on the Zong. The Zong was originally named the Zorg, meaning care in Dutch, by its owners, the Middelburg Commercie Company. It operated as a slave ship based in Middelburg, Netherlands, and made a voyage in 1777, delivering kidnapped Africans to the Dutch colony of Suriname in South America. The Zong was a square-stern ship of 110 tons burden, so it could carry about 110 tons. So the HMS Alert, this is a British ship, captured her as part of the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War on February the 10th, 1781. On February 26th, the Alert and the Zong arrived at Cape Coast Castle in what is present-day Ghana. Cape Coast Castle was maintained and staffed along with the other forts and castles by the Royal African Company, the RAC, which used the castle as its original headquarters. In early March 1781, the master of the William purchased the Zong on behalf of a syndicate of Liverpool merchants, which included Edward Wilson, George Case, James Aspinall, and William, James and John Gregson. William Gregson had an interest in 50 slaving voyages between 1747 and 1780. He also served as the mayor of Liverpool in 1762. By the end of his life, vessels in which Gregson had a financial stake, had carried 58,000 Africans to slavery in the Americas. So, how was the Zong paid for? So the Zong was paid for with bills of exchange. So it's basically an order, basically state that X will pay Y at a certain date of a certain amount, and both parties will agree to that and sign to it. And so it was paid for with bills of exchange, and the 244 enslaved people already on board were part of the transaction. So the enslaved people were used to secure that loan for that ship. The ship was not insured until after it started its voyage. The insurers, another syndicate from Liverpool, underwrote the ship and its enslaved people for up to £8,000, approximately half the enslaved people's potential market value. The remaining risk was borne by the owners. The Zong was the first command of Luke Collingwood, formerly the surgeon on the William. While Collingwood lacked experience in navigation and command, the ship's surgeon were typically involved in selecting kidnapped people for the purchase in Africa. So their medical expertise supported the determination of commodity value for a captive. If the surgeon rejected a captive, that individual suffered commercial debt, being of no value, and was liable to be killed by the African traders. Sometimes these killings happened in the presence of the surgeon. It is therefore likely that Collingwood had already witnessed the mass killing of enslaved people. So this may have prepared him psychologically for what was about to unfold on the Zong. Okay? The vessel's only passenger, Robert Stubbs, was a former captain of slave ships. In early 1780, he was appointed by the African Committee of the Royal African Company as the governor of Mabu, a British fortification near Cape Coast Castle in Ghana. This position made him also vice president of the RAC Council of the castle. Due to his ineptitude and enmity incurred with John Roberts, governor of the castle, Stubbs was forced out of the governorship of Mabu by the RAC Council after 9 months. So he was out of a job. Witness statement gathered by the African Committee of the RAC accused him of being semi-literate drunkard who mismanaged the slave trading activities of the fort. Stubbs was about to return to Britain, so Collingwood may have thought this earlier experience on slave ships would be useful. Because, I can't see him just hopping onto a slave ship to go to Jamaica. He must have had a reason to be on that ship. He was not just a passenger. Okay, so he knew of the risk at sea. He knew there would be, or there could be insurrections, murder, suicide, death, all types of things happen on the Middle Passage. And he was willing to take that risk. Okay, so we see him out of a job, and now he's on a vessel, on a slave ship, on its way to Jamaica. So the Zong had 17-man crew when it left Africa, which was far too small to maintain adequate sanitary conditions on the ship. Mariners willing to risk disease and rebellions on slave ships were difficult to recruit within Britain and were harder to find for a vessel captured from the Dutch off the coast of Africa. So maybe they're thinking this is a marked vessel and that the Dutch may come back for it. The Zong was manned with the remnants of the previous Dutch crew, the crew of the William, and with unemployed sailors hired from settlements along the African coast. So we find inadequate staff, and a lot of them may have lacked experience. And this is Luke Collingwood's first command of a slave ship, so we know he's inexperienced. He was a ship surgeon before, so it's like a doctor on board a ship basically. And they also would reject and accept the enslaved or the people who were just captured, based on, how medically how they present themselves. Like if he thought that they would not be able to withstand the middle passage, that long journey, then they would be rejected by him. So that's the role of a ship surgeon. Okay, so when the Zong sailed from Accra with 442 slaves on August the 18th, or the enslaved, August the 18th, 1781, it had taken on more than twice the number of people that it could safely transport. In the 1780s, the British-built ships typically carried 1.75 slaves per ton of the ship's capacity. On the Zong, the ratio was 4.0 per ton. A British slave ship of the period would carry around 193 enslaved persons, and it was extremely unusual for a ship of the Zong's relatively small size to carry so many. After taking on drinking water at Sao Tome, the Zong began its voyage across the Atlantic Ocean to Jamaica on September 6, 1781. So I'll be putting a map of Sao Tome. It's an island off the coast, like it's off the coast of Africa. On the 18th or the 19th of November, the ship neared Tobago. So this is November and they're in the Caribbean. They did not stop there to replenish water supplies. So maybe I'm thinking they probably had enough water on board because they did not stop in Tobago. It is unclear who, if anyone, was in charge of the ship at this point, as Luke Collingwood had been gravely ill for some time. The man who would normally have replaced him, first mate James Casal, has been previously suspended from duty following an argument on November the 14th. So there are now rumblings on the Zong. There was an argument, and we do not know who was involved in the argument and what was the argument about. Okay, but we do know there were some rumblings, and James Casal was suspended from duty. So he was the one who's supposed to be assisting the captain. Robert Stubbs had captained a slave ship several decades earlier, and he temporarily commanded the Zong during Collingwood's incapacitation, but he was not a registered member of the vessel's crew. According to historian James Walvin, the breakdown of the command structure on the ship might explain the subsequent navigational errors and the absence of checks on supplies of water. So on November the 27th or the 28th, the crew sighted Jamaica at a distance of 27 nautical miles, that's 50 kilometers or 31 miles, but misidentified it as a French colony of Saint-Domingue on the island of Hispaniola. So that's present-day Haiti and Dominica Republic. Two different countries on one piece of landmass. The Zong continued on its westward course, leaving Jamaica behind. Remember the poor souls in the hold of the ship. And some of these captives or ancestors, Africans, kings and queens, have been on the ship maybe over a year or close to a year, because the ship was captured by the British from the Dutch, and they're already in the hold of the ship. And you know that they're on the west coast for months. This is how the slave trade works. They're on the west coast for months, those ships loading the ships with captives. And this ship was intercepted in February, so they may have been there, for months previous to that. So they're under a lot of pressure here. So this mistake was recognized only after the ship was 300 miles leeward of the island. So again, inexperience. they left Jamaica behind and they're going west. Now they have to turn back. Okay, and it's going to take approximately, as per their account, it will take about 10 to 13 days to get back to Jamaica. Overcrowding, malnutrition, accidents, and disease had already killed several mariners and approximately 62 Africans. So we have a high death rate. James Casal later claimed that there was only 4 days water remaining on the ship when the navigational error was discovered, and Jamaica was still 10 to 13 sailing days away. If the enslaved people died on shore, the Liverpool ship owners would have had no redress from their insurers. Similarly, if the enslaved people died a natural death, as contemporary term put it, at sea, then the insurance could not be claimed. If some enslaved people were thrown overboard in order to save the rest of the cargo or the ship, then a claim could be made under the general average clause. This is a clause in insurance. Basically, it gives the captain the authority to jettison, which means throw overboard any cargo or some of the cargo in order to save the rest. So he's mitigating the loss. The ship's insurance covered the loss of the enslaved people at £30 per person. So everyone had a price on their head. On November 29th, the crew assembled to consider the proposal that some of the enslaved people should be thrown overboard. So there was a meeting. James Casal later claimed that he had disagreed with the plan at first, but soon unanimously agreed. So they came to an agreement. On November the 29th, 54 women and children were thrown through the cabin windows into the sea. And some of the reference material will tell you that approximately 8 p.m. on November 29th, this dreadful act occurred. And it rained that day. Okay? A lot of rain. On December the 1st, 42 male enslaved people were thrown overboard, and 36 more followed in the next few days. Another 10, in a display of defiance at the inhumanity of the slavers, choose to commit suicide by jumping into the sea. Right? This happened quite a bit, on the Middle Passage, right? Having heard the shrieks of the victims as they were thrown into the water, one of the captives requested that the remaining Africans be denied all food and drink rather than be thrown into the sea. So here we are, someone stepping up, one of the captives, one of the Africans stepping up, showing some type of leadership skills, negotiating, basically trying maybe in his own way, because you had Dutch language on the ship, you had English, and then you had the Africans, the captives, speaking different tribal languages, right? So I'm sure he's trying to communicate some way, somehow to them that they, they're okay. Don't give us any food or water. Just don't throw us into the sea. They wanted to live, right? Despite the awful conditions, right? I'm sure that this African did not know anything about insurance, right? It's not something that they would have been exposed to. And of course, the English know about insurance, and that's the first place I believe insurance started, right? So he did not know that each of them had a price on their head of £30. They were insured. So maybe he's thinking they are disposing of us because they don't have enough food and water to maintain all of us. But as we can see, that may not be the reason, right? There's other reasons behind that according to the information that was presented. The crew ignored his request. In total, 142 Africans were killed by the time the ship reached Jamaica. The account of the King's Bench trial reports that one enslaved person managed to climb back onto the ship after being thrown into the water. So this is unbelievable. This person wanted to live. So this person climbed back into the ship after being thrown into the water. The crew claimed that the enslaved people had been jettisoned because the ship did not have enough water to keep all the enslaved people alive for the rest of the voyage. The claim was later disputed, as the ship had 420 imperial gallons of water left when it arrived in Jamaica on December 22nd. So they've started to bore holes into their testimonies right now. An affidavit later made by Casal stated that on December 1st, when 42 enslaved people were killed, it rained heavily for more than a day. So the heavens opened, allowing 6 casks of water sufficient for 11 days to be collected. So they had enough water. On December 22nd, 1781, the Zong arrived at Black River. So our foreparents or ancestors' feet touched Jamaican soil on that date. There were 208 enslaved people on board, less than half the number taken from Africa. So this is how dangerous the Middle Passage can be. The survivors were sold into slavery in January 1782. So I guess they kept them for like a week or two. They would be unloaded or they disembarked in Black River. And I'm assuming maybe they're led over to the Farquharson Wharf because that was like a clearinghouse in Black River. They temporarily like hold them there like a jail cell type of thing. So we traveled to Black River, and we also have some video showing those quote unquote houses where they would have been held. So they're like jail cells. They had no windows and they're low, and only the door, when it opened, maybe that's the only way they get some fresh air, right? So they've left the confines of the ship, but now they're in a same predicament, right? They're being held there, but at least now they're in Jamaica. And our ancestors that came through the port of Black River, it was a busy port back then. Most of them would be sold in the county of Cornwall or Surrey, and most of the plantations were located in Westmoreland or St. Elizabeth. So those two parishes would have taken the bulk of them. So these people were sold for an average price of £36 per person. So if you do the math, you'll get £7,488. And this was 1781. So if you factor in inflation in today's currency, that would be over £1 million. So this is big business, lucrative. The trading of human beings, selling of human beings, trading in human flesh. The Jamaican Vice Admiralty Court upheld the legality of the British capture of the Zong from the Dutch, and the syndicate renamed the ship Richard of Jamaica. So it was the Zorg, then the Zong, now it's Richard of Jamaica. So they may have changed the name because the Zong is now, has getting bad publicity because of what happened on that ship. So I guess they decided to change the name. Luke Collingwood died 3 days after the Zong reached Jamaica. So the captain of the ship passed away in Jamaica. I'm wondering if he was buried in Jamaica. I would think so. And where is he buried? It would be nice to know where he's buried. If it was marked, then there could be some follow-up. So this was 2 years before 1783 court proceedings about the case. So he was not, of course, not present at the trial. So when the news of the Zong Massacre reached Great Britain, the ship owners claimed compensation from their insurers for the loss of the enslaved people. The insurers refused to honor the claim, and the owners took them to court. The Zong's logbook went missing after the ship reached Jamaica. So here we are. The logbook is missing, and the logbook records important information like the management of the ship, the operation, the navigation. Anything important would be documented into the logbook, and it went missing. Okay. So there's no documentary evidence about the massacre, though there's no formal record of the first trial other than what is referred to in the subsequent appeals hearing. The ship's insurer claimed that the log had been deliberately destroyed, which the Gregson, so the owners in London, they're part of the syndicate, denied this. Almost all the surviving source material is of questionable reliability. The two witnesses who gave evidence, Robert Stubbs and James Casal, were strongly motivated to exonerate themselves from blame. It is possible that the figures concerning the number of people killed and the amount of water that remained on the ship and the distance beyond Jamaica that the Zong had mistakenly sailed are inaccurate. So here we are. The court is saying that, this is their testimony. We don't know if whatever they're telling us is true. It could be way more than 130 plus people being thrown overboard. And we don't know how far away they were from Jamaica when they discovered the error and they had to turn back. So they were saying 300 miles. It could be way more. And we don't know how many, how much water was on the ship and all of that. So legal proceedings began when the insurers refused to compensate the owners of the Zong. The dispute was initially tried at Guildhall in London on March 6, 1783, with the Lord Chief Justice, the Earl of Mansfield, overseeing the trial before a jury. Mansfield was previously the judge in the Somerset's case in 1772, which concerned the legality of enslaving people in Britain. He had ruled that slavery had never been established by statute in Britain and was not supported by common law. So Robert Stubbs was the only witness in the first Zong trial, and the jury found in favor of the owners under an established protocol in maritime insurance that considered slaves as cargo, or the enslaved as cargo. On March 19, 1783, a Laudo Equiano, a formerly enslaved person, told the anti-slave trade activist Granville Sharp of the events aboard the Zong, and the newspaper soon carried a lengthy account reporting that the captain had ordered the enslaved people killed in 3 batches. Sharp sought legal advice the next day about the possibility of prosecuting the crew for murder. So this was a very important trial, and it went to the highest court in Britain. And because of this trial, it really sped up the process of the abolition of the slave trade and then the abolition of slavery. And all of this occurred 1781, and by 1791, the traders could no longer insure enslaved people as cargo. So Collingwood had died in 1781, and the only witness to the massacre to appear at Westminster Hall was again Robert Stubbs, although a written affidavit by first mate James Casal was made available to the lawyers. So James Casal never turned up in court. Stubbs claimed that there was an absolute necessity for throwing over the enslaved people because the crew feared all the enslaved people would die if they did not throw some into the sea. The insurers argued that Collingwood had made a blunder, a mistake in sailing beyond Jamaica, and that the enslaved people had been killed so their owners could claim compensation. They alleged that Collingwood did this because he did not want his first voyage as a slave ship captain to be unprofitable. So those were the arguments. So John Lee responded by saying that the enslaved people perished just as cargo of goods would perish were jettisoned for the greater good of the ship. The insurer's legal team replied that Lee's argument could never justify the killing of innocent people. Each of these three addressed issues of humanity in the treatment of the enslaved, and that the actions of the Zong's crew were nothing less than murder. Okay, so we're not going to go any further into the case. The long and short of it is that the owners of the Zong did not receive an insurance payment, and the crew of the Zong were never prosecuted for murder. I've just a thought that what if they had sent for some of those captives, the people who came over on the Zong, the enslaved people, and get them into court to speak and to say what really happened on the Zong. That would have been something to be recorded. But I guess their testimony would not be held up in court, because at that time they were just regarded as cargo. And if they gave a testimony in court, what would have happened to them after that? Okay. So it's really ironic that in 1807, May 1st, after Granville Sharp and all the other abolitionists, they worked tirelessly to get the Slave Trade Act, installed, and also to abolish slavery as well. So it's very ironic that the Kitty Amelia, the last slave ship to leave Liverpool, left Liverpool in 1807 July. The act was passed in May, and they were given permission to leave, to go on one more last voyage back to the west coast of Africa to trade again in human beings. So they got permission in April of 1807. They knew that the Trade Act was coming, and they must have been scrambling. Somehow they got permission. Maybe they had connections, who knows? And they were allowed to go for one last voyage. Very ironic. So we're going to look at what it was like, or what it may have been like for our ancestors' feet to touch soil, the Jamaican soil, on December 22nd. So they're on this long voyage that has no end. And many of them could have been on there from the time they were under the Dutch authority, because they were captured first by the Dutch. And then this ship was then captured by the English, by the British, right? So we salute our ancestors that were aboard the Zong for their fortitude, their strength, their bravery, their tenacity. And on December 22nd, we will pause to remember them. Usually, the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, the Honorable Olivia Babsy-Grange, her office, would normally put on some type of commemoration to the people who were massacred on the Zong. So normally it would be like a church service or the laying of wreaths at the Zhang Memorial, and I'll be showing you a video of the Zhang Memorial when we travel to Black River as well. And also sometimes they would, throw flowers into the sea, because the Black River flows right into the Caribbean Sea. That's why it was such an important port as well, because of the location. So in 2007, that memorial was erected to remember those who passed away on the Zong. So they endured all type of violence. It was violent from the beginning to the end, and half of them made it to Jamaica. So you can just imagine the condition that they were in when they arrived, battered and bruised. They've been through the worst. It was an horrific voyage, and this voyage led the way for the abolition or the abolishment, of the Slave Trade Act. That was installed. The Slave Trade Act was passed as a result of all of this, and then further down, maybe about 30 years, so I would say approximately 20 something years after that, which is in 1834, the slavery was abolished, and it was done in two parts. So it was 1834 and 1838. So this case led to all of that. So there you have it, the Zong Massacre. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and remember to leave a comment as well. Take care of yourself, walk good, and see you on the next video.